The next day, John arrived on foot at the flat on Baker Street at 7 o'clock exactly. He had just knocked on the front door when a black taxi stopped at the side of the street and Sherlock Holmes jumped out. "Hello," he said, not seeming surprised to see that John had come. John turned. "Mr. Holmes? Call me Sherlock, please." John looked up at the front of the building. "This is in a nice part of the city," he said. "It must be expensive." "The owner, Mrs. Hudson, is giving me a special price on the rent," explained Sherlock. "A few years ago, her husband was caught by the police in Florida. The courts wanted him to pay the maximum price, death. I was able to help." "So, you saved her husband?" asked John. Sherlock gave a little smile. "Oh, no. I made sure that he paid the full price." Before John could say anything to that, the door opened and a woman in her late 50s appeared. She smiled at Sherlock. "Sherlock," she said warmly. This was Mrs. Hudson. To John, she seemed like a nice, friendly lady. Sherlock introduced John, and both men followed Mrs. Hudson inside. While Sherlock ran up the stairs, it took John more time because of his bad leg. When he reached the first floor, Sherlock had already opened the door to the flat. John went in and looked around. The rooms were big with high ceilings, not cheap in this part of London. There was just one problem. The place was messy. It wasn't dirty, just untidy. There were books and papers and photos everywhere. The kitchen table was covered with science equipment of some kind. There were several boxes full of more papers and books on the floor. "Well, this could be nice," said John, nodding his head. "Very nice indeed. It just has to be tidied up," he thought to himself. "All this rubbish lying around." "Yes," agreed Sherlock. "I thought so too. So I moved my things in and—" John looked quickly at Sherlock. So all this rubbish was Sherlock's stuff. Quickly, Sherlock began to move things around, picking up a few papers and moving them to a different pile. "Of course I can tidy up," he began. "Well, a bit." Mrs. Hudson appeared at the flat door. "What do you think then, Dr. Watson?" John wasn't sure. He was still getting used to the sudden change in direction that his life had taken. Was he really going to share a flat with this strange man who he had only just met? Mrs. Hudson had noticed the kitchen. "Oh, Sherlock, look at the mess you've made." She hurried into the kitchen and began to tidy up. John sat down in one of the big chairs in the living room. "I read about you on the internet last night," he told Sherlock. "Anything interesting?" "I found your website, The Science of Detective Work." "What did you think?" asked Sherlock. "You said that you could identify a computer programmer by his tie and an airline pilot by his left thumb." It was clear from his voice that he didn't believe Sherlock. "Yes," said Sherlock. "And I knew about your army life by looking at your face and limp, and about your brother from your mobile phone." John had been wondering about this ever since his first meeting with Sherlock. How? But before Sherlock answered, Mrs. Hudson came back into the living room with a newspaper from the kitchen table. "What about these suicides, Sherlock?" she asked, shaking her head at the news on the front page of Beth Davenport's death. "3 of them, exactly the same." Sherlock was standing at the window. A police car with flashing lights had just stopped on the street outside. Sherlock recognised the man who got out of it. Detective Inspector Lestrade of New Scotland Yard. "4, he said simply. "There's been a 4th suicide. And there's something different this time." Moments later, Lestrade was in the flat. Sherlock didn't waste time. He just said one word to Lestrade. "Where?" "Brixton," said Lestrade. "Lauriston Gardens." "What's new about this one?" Sherlock asked the policeman. "You wouldn't come to get me if there wasn't something new." Lestrade gave Sherlock a hopeful look. "You know how these suicides never leave notes? Well, this one did. Will you come?" Sherlock's mind worked fast as it took in this new information. Who's doing the science work at the crime scene? Anderson. Sherlock looked annoyed. Anderson doesn't work well with me. Lestrade didn't want to take no for an answer. "Well, he won't be your assistant." "But I need an assistant," said Sherlock. He thought for a moment. "OK, I'll come, but not in a police car. I'll be right behind it." "Thank you," said Lestrade. When the policeman left, a smile flashed across Sherlock's face. "Brilliant!" he said, jumping into the air. His eyes shone with excitement. "Yes! 4 suicides and now a note. It's like Christmas." He started towards the door, with his coat in his hand. "John, make yourself at home. Have a cup of tea. Mrs. Hudson, I'll be late. I might need some food when I get back." "I'm your landlady, dear," explained Mrs. Hudson. "It's not my job to get you dinner." But Sherlock had already left the room. "Just look at him running around," said Mrs. Hudson, turning to John. "I can see that you're the sort who prefers sitting down. You rest your leg, and I'll make you that cup of tea." As she started towards the flat's little kitchen, John suddenly hit the arms of his chair in anger. "This stupid leg!" he shouted. Noticing the look of surprise on Mrs. Hudson's face, he added quickly, "I'm so sorry. It's just that sometimes this leg is so annoying. A cup of tea would be lovely. Thank you." "Just this once, dear," said Mrs. Hudson calmly, returning to the kitchen. "As I said, I'm the landlady, and it isn't my job to make you tea." John turned his attention to the newspaper and the story of the suicides. "You're a doctor, right?" said a voice from the door. Sherlock was back. His brilliant blue eyes did not move from John's face. "Yes." John stood carefully, using his walking stick to help. "Are you any good?" continued Sherlock. "Very good." "Seen a lot of deaths?" "Yes." "And quite a bit of trouble?" "More than enough trouble for one life," answered John. "Want to see some more?" John gave a sudden, unexpected smile. "Yes," he said quickly. When Mrs. Hudson came out with the tea, both John and Sherlock were leaving the flat. "Sorry, Mrs. Hudson," John said. "No time for the tea. We're going out." Sherlock smiled widely at his landlady. 4 impossible suicides. There's no point in sitting at home when there's finally something fun going on. Mrs. Hudson shook her head. "Look how happy you are, Sherlock. It isn't right to be so happy when people have died." "Who cares about what is right, Mrs. Hudson?" said Sherlock excitedly. "The game is on." A few minutes later, John and Sherlock were sitting in the back of a black London taxi on their way to Brixton. It was dark now, and Sherlock looked out at the brightly lit shop windows and streetlights of London. He knew that John was watching him carefully. "OK, you've got questions," Sherlock said. "Yeah. Where are we going?" asked John. "Crime scene. Next." "Who are you?" asked John. "What do you do?" "I'd say that you're a private detective." "But?" But the police don't go to private detectives. I'm a different kind of detective, said SherLock, obviously proud of this fact. The only one of my kind in the world, actually. I invented the job. The police do come to me for help when they don't know what to do in a case. John shook his head. The police don't ask for help from people who aren't professionals, he said. SherLock turned to face him. When I met you yesterday and I said Afghanistan or Iraq, you looked surprised. Yes, John nodded. How did you know? I didn't know. I saw. SherLock spoke quickly. Your haircut and the way that you stand show that you're an army man. I heard the end of your conversation with Mike, so I knew that you trained together at the hospital. Clearly, then, you were an army doctor. You have a suntan on your face, but not above the wrists. You've been abroad, but not on holiday. You have a bad leg because you were injured in action. However, your limp is only bad when you walk, but you don't ask for a chair when you're standing. It's as if you've forgotten about it. That suggests that the problem, or part of it, is in your mind. That's why I said that you have a therapist. SherLock paused. And then there's your brother. You haven't got the money for an expensive phone like that, so it must have been a gift. But there are scratches on the side of it, as if it has been in someone's pocket with coins and keys. You wouldn't do that, so somebody else must have owned it first. Of course, it's obvious who that was. The name on the back, said John. SherLock nodded. The words, "To Harry with love," had been scratched on the back of the phone. So somebody in your family gave you his old phone. Not your father. He would be too old for technology like that. A brother, then. But why did he give you a phone that had been a gift to him? He must have left the person who gave him the phone. John was shaking his head in disbelief. How could anybody see all of that? You're looking for a cheap flat in London, SherLock went on. But you're not asking your brother for help. That means that you don't get on with him very well. John looked out at the dark streets. They were in a part of South London that he didn't know very well now. That was amazing, he said. Do you think so? Said SherLock. He sounded a bit surprised. Of course it was, said John. It was extraordinary. Quite extraordinary. That isn't what people usually say, said SherLock. What do people usually say? They usually tell me to go away. John knew that they had reached the crime scene when he saw the flashing lights of several police cars. There was a line of yellow police tape around the front of the building to stop people coming in, and a police officer guarded the front door. As SherLock and John walked towards the crime scene, SherLock asked, Did I get anything wrong? It's true. Harry and I don't get on with each other, said John. And Harry is getting a divorce. I was right about everything, said SherLock, pleased with himself for guessing correctly. And Harry is short for Harriet, said John. SherLock stopped. Your sister? Harry is your sister? He shook his head, annoyed with himself for making a mistake. But now it was time to test his skills with something more important. Inside Lauriston Gardens, the building in front of them, was the fourth dead body. It was time to learn why the police needed his help again.